Good day and welcome to the conversation. Today we'll be focusing on an issue that has been centralized in the public domain. Newspapers have been writing about it, people have been talking about it, social media is debating, cabinet is debating, even the First Lady has shared her 2 cents on it. We're talking the sodomy issue. I am joined by Linda Baumann, who is a human rights activist and is with the Namibia Diverse Women's Association. I'm also joined by Pastor Laban Muashekele, who is a retired pastor of the Evangelical Baptist Church in Namibia. Linda Baumann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with you. Does the common law offenses of sodomy and unnatural sexual offenses criminalize homosexuality?
Yes, it does. It does not criminalize homosexuality. It criminalizes the unnatural sexual practices, which is an offense. So it's important to understand how the intersectional relations of the unnatural sexual offenses act and this the common law, sodomy law, are intersected. So back in the days with the colonizers, they had this law that outlines everything that has been perceived as unnatural sexual offenses. And it was cross-cutting. And obviously anal sex is one of those items that are there. And after independence, that part fell off for heterosexual people. And of course, there are other intersectional unnatural sexual offenses that are still seen as offenses in this country that cannot be taken off because it carries very clear direct lines of abuse and coercion, for instance. So in this regard, for instance, in terms of, and I want to link where this conversation advances from, and that's with the Law Reform Commission's report. Now, it's important to understand that a lot of Namibians had a common understanding that the status of sodomy criminalizes homosexuality in the country. And it's important to segregate the status of homosexuality from the status of the sodomy law and how the intersectional relations is to the unnatural sexual offenses. And I think the current discussion should also not be conflicted with the same-sex marriage cases that are there. Those are all segmented form of discussion. So, and also Namibians did not read thoroughly in terms of what the LRDC is trying to bring across. And I should say, as somebody who's been part and parcel of the human rights work in this country from civil society and also the LGBTI community, this particular report's advocacy is coming for more than 10 years. It is not yesterday when political leadership got up and decided that this process needs to take place. We must also remember that this sodomy, the report from the LRDC, the connection of the unnatural sexual offenses and the sodomy law, comes from a process of the absolute law process that was openly convened in this country for Namibians to advance any legislative framework that really discriminates and advances injustices and inequalities to all. And I think in that framework, it's important to understand that the practice of unnatural sexual offenses and the link to sodomy has a direct connection to constitutional violations of consenting adults. And it's important to understand that if I'm a gay man and I know I am not doing anything wrong and I'm not coercing my partner, we are consenting adults having anal sex, does that now become a subject area of conviction? And how do we align that as a subject area of conviction if we as Namibians after independence have not reflected on legislation that was put forth to us as a country as unnatural sexual offenses? And I think the debate needs to be set straight in this country that critical thinking is important, yes, but the linkage of saying that Namibia is trying to legalize homosexuality is not the case.
Okay, let me just cut you there quickly. You told us, you spoke about the history of the law and where it came from. But surely, if a law is still present in a certain day and age and in a certain time, there must be some. It has to be necessary, right? There has to be a place for it. Do you think that this law has a place in this day and age?
1927 law?
Yes.
No.
Not at all.
It doesn't have place right now. It has to be every law that has been reviewed, for instance. And there's two levels of it. You're reviewing it to be able to amend and strengthen it to the current status quo of your country's political landscape and legal framework. At the same time, also, there are other laws that are coming for years that are very relevant, that are strengthened to uphold and uplift the rights of equality for all. And I think we need to be very clear about the lines of what this law has meant and what it was justified using for. And it's important for us to be able to align that and be clear about what that means, because I am not dismissing other legislation that comes in the 1980s or whatever that are not relevant today. Because what we've done as a country is do legal reform processes. And this process of the absolute process was also just a legal reform process that the LRDC has done.
Okay, we'll dive into that very soon. Let me just bring the pastor in. Pastor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Pastor, just a bit unrelated from this. I just want to find out, since you are a retired pastor, what generally is the church's position on homosexuality?
Well, the church's position in regard to homosexuality is that we differentiate the act or the behavior of a person from the person. In other words, we love and respect all people simply because they are God's image bearer. That doesn't matter whether you are a man or a woman, or whatever nation, language, we respect you because you are a God's image bearer. And when we are there, we also recognize that the world in which we live is a corrupt world. Therefore, corruption is looming nearly every moment. And behind every corruption is a human being, or behind every human being is a corrupt concept. This is why you have people who are drug abusers, you have people who are rapists, you have people who are murderers, and so on and so forth. But when we come to meet with them, we first of all see the image of God in them, and we respect them for that very reason. And the second thing we do also, we make it very categorically clear that we do not submit or we do not accept or we do not embrace their behavior, their action. Yet we are working very hard to make sure that they have been given equal to let all of us equal to life. I mean, equal right to life, equal right to work and to eat and to have what we call medical attention, like anybody else. However, we do not condone their behavior or their action. The same applies to their sexuality, the issue of sexuality.
So, Pastor, if you are separating the act of sexuality from the person, does that mean you welcome homosexual people into the churches or into your church?
Because remember, the church is a clinic, and we need every person must come to the clinic and be attended to. However, the problem is that they must not expect when the medicine is being distributed.
So, with that, in your position, can homosexual couples get married in a church?
The issue of marriage is another issue, because now you must remember that the church in Namibia is just like the government of the Republic of Namibia. The government of the Republic of Namibia is working under the new law, which is the Namibian Constitution. And it was just established 81 years ago. So the Constitution of the Republic of Namibia and the Republic of Namibia itself. The church was instituted many centuries ago. And the church was not just established, but it's working also with its own, what we call supreme law, enshrined in the book of the Bible. Therefore, we follow the church is taken under the principles of Scripture, and it's therefore respecting for the church respecting every individual we do not control, as I said, the behavior of other people, including married people of the same sex. But we are not really saying we must hate them or beat them or cast them away. We are just simply saying we will not help them for two reasons. One is the Old Testament reason, the other is the New Testament reason. Let me just read for you two verses from the Old Testament prophets. And unfortunately, there can't be men and women on the scripture there. Please, you must not run away when the Old Testament became very hard on you, because it's also hard on me on this side. And the reason why we must not be present very much when the Old Testament is read is because we study the New Testament of God. Here you read the Bible like a bath, where you have a mirror and the bath. You go to the mirror, you are naked, and you are terrible, and your face and your hair. You must not run away from the bathroom because you still have a shower there. The only thing you must escape to the shower instead of running away from the bath. The same principle applies to the scripture. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 18. It says, if a man lies with a man, if a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man marries both a woman and their mother, it is wicked. Both he and they must be burnt in the fire, so that no wickedness will be among you. You see, I do not want to go down to the other verse, but the first verse is the answer
So, Pastor, sorry to cut you there. The simple answer to this is that homosexual couples cannot get married in the church.
Yes, you cannot get married.
Right.
I want to go to the New Testament. I want to go to the New Testament.
Pastor, hold on to that thought. I'll come back to you on that. But I just want to present something to you quickly. We all know that the church and the law is completely separate because we are a secular state, right? But the two are very relevant and fundamental structures in our society.
Yes.
Right? Now,
Yes.
if the issue of same-sex marriage is legalized, if it is legalized for homosexual couples to get married, where do Christ-centered gay couples get married?
Great question. But what does the Constitution of the Republic of Namibia says? Chapter 1 and Article 1. Chapter 1, Article 1 of the Republic of Namibia says the Republic of Namibia has been established as a sovereign, secular, democratic, and a unitary state founded upon the principle of democracy and the rule of law, just for all. That word secular, what does it mean? It means that the Republic of Namibia will be a country for all of us. The church and the state will work separately. The church will not intervene with what the government is doing. Neither the government must intervene what the church is doing. In other words, the church is not here to dance on the music of the government. Neither the government is there to dance at the music of the church. If the government wants to liberalize the homosexual is fine, they must also prepare to let them, not the church.
So fundamentally, you are saying that even if it is legalized, the church doesn't have any responsibility to marry same-sex couples.
Because we are not what I call, we are not the servant of the government in that regard. We are making that on our own institution with our own rights and laws and so on.
Okay, thank you for that, Pastor. Linda, back to you now on the issue of the same-sex marriage. We will get back to the sodomy issue again. If this law of sodomy is done away with, if there is a succession, or if it does succeed that the law is abolished, do you think that it will open a space for the Same-Sex Marriage Act to be passed or presented to Parliament, or do you think that we're still very far away from that?
I want to take you, I feel you're conflicting issues here, and it still advances the stigma and prejudice and homophobia towards us and transphobia. it is important to segregate the status of homosexuality and the status of sodomy in this country. Because what is happening right now, you guys just objectified my life and my being, a direct violation of Article 8 that degrades me as a person who's sitting here as a homosexual. Because Pastor himself is talking about behavior. This issue is about constitutional equality and protection of every person's right. Then in this very same country, there is that legal framework of the sodomy law that advances inequality for gay men. So it is important to segregate this and not pull in the same-sex marriage discussion. Those cases are happening because every person has the right to challenge the constitutional basis and the legal framework in this country, because the Marital Act is very clear about men and women, while Article 14 talks about men and women of full age. And if I link that to the Marital Act, it means that the Marital Act was very specific of who can get into matrimony. And we are very clear about that. The country is clear. Matrimony is between a man and a woman, not between the same sex. That's a complete debate on its own. That's a complete discussion on its own. We shouldn't be looking at that when the abolishment of the sodomy law is going to happen in this country. It means that, well, Namibia is now condoning homosexuality. Namibia has always been equal in terms of its citizenry and its representation of equality. That's why I can sit here proudly and say I'm a lesbian woman with pride. Because if I wasn't safe in this country, I would have left this country already. And for me as a human rights defender to still live and sit here, it is evident that there is an enabling environment. However, there's this law that is conflicting with people in our box, because we are not homogeneous. There is more than us. And people shouldn't conflict issues of gender identity with sexual orientation. Because at the end of and then our sexual practices. Because our sexual practices has nothing to do with anybody in this country. Because then I would ask myself, how does Article 13 apply to me? The right to privacy. And I think that is what everybody does. Do we ask you as straight people how you have sex in your bedroom? Do you want to tell me you are maintaining missionary position in this country? Now when you see a gay person, you can't visualize how we can be loving in loving relationship, and people think that our relationships are just sexual. Why objectify my bedroom and my being? And I think that's the debate that I want to challenge all Namibians and every leader in this country to come sit across me and tell me, what am I doing wrong that criminalizes and that demonizes me from them and their criminal lifestyles that they're also doing? Their lifestyles that they're having in their own homes of sleeping around. Now you want to come and demonize me. It is unfair. I understand the position of the church in terms of behavior and being a clinic. I respect, because I'm also a spiritual being. But I will not be objectified. The fact that I can demonstrate I've raised children in this country who are heterosexual, men who have children. It is impossible for me to be objectified like that, not even by church and not even by the state. Because we are just as equal, because what is happening here is high level of discrimination, injustices and inequalities. And I think it is unfair that the Namibian nations are insulting our family homes and our parents. Because I come out of a very strong, valued house. And I will not go across the street to be able to disrespect anybody as a homosexual woman. And I think that needs to be clear in the way and also for us to not conflict the discussions. If we want to talk about same-sex marriage, let's have a very specific discussion on same-sex marriage, because that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how equal are you and I. And do I have protections in this country that is as equal and beneficial as yours? What type of service do I get as a lesbian woman? And if you are criminalizing this discussion of sodomy, it's very directed to gay men. What about me as a lesbian woman? So you are choosing which homosexual is better than the other one or what? It is impossible that we allow such bigotry in this country and people cannot substantiate. I challenge any leader in this country to challenge us as queer people. because they shouldn't look at us as objects.
Do you think then, based on what Pastor says and based on the knowledge that you have of on the positions of the church, that they in themselves are being bigotry and that they objectify members of the LGBTQI community?
Of course. Look, the struggle with the church will never end. I can actually tell you today, the church allows us to have our journeys of our spirituality and our sexualities. That is why we're able to enter the church and still feel comfortable to be in church and praise God.
Hold that thought. Pastor, what are your thoughts on what Linda has just said?
Well, this is what I've just said in the beginning, that if I think you take the concept of people, I will say them and I will even help them in my room, and I will call police to arrest you because you are violating the right of individual. You understand what I mean? But when somebody is coming and forcing himself on us to agree on certain principles, that is people that is addicted or that he has adopted. This is the time when the church is well. Here we stand, because your right has ended when my right has started. And it applies to me. My right has ended where her right and the other people's right ended. So this is why we not go around to throw stones to the settlement in this country. We are not even doing a campaign system. When people campaign, campaign against all kinds of sin, including the sin of stealing. And this country is compounded from every side. So when we start and we come and the second the church preach, we do not categorically pointing out and say this sin more abomination than other. All sin is sin, and we will bring them out because that is our responsibility. It's like a police guy who is employed. He tries to arrest the thief, whether the thief has stolen the tweet, or he has stolen the car, or he has just stolen someone's before. He must be arrested and detained before the law. That is our responsibility, to love all people and to preach to all people that we love. Because we also realize that telling them, loving them to an extent on the extent of truth, that's not right. Because love without truth is hypocrisy, and the truth without love is brutality. It's why when I meet people like her and the others, we talk and laugh and we be cheap. I have no problem for her to invite me to her house and get coffee. I will come and we talk and we laugh. Why? Because telling the truth without love is like I'm smoking her thoughts. But also loving her too much without truth, without telling the truth, that we can help the people just kind of idea. We can cancel them. We can come to the table. And I was not even expecting very much the date and expecting that to come to the platform like this. I expect them to come to the office and sit down and explain to us, because we do not fully understand the whole attitude of the whole.
Pastor, sorry to cut you. Are you saying that every member of the LGBTQI community needs some form of counseling from the church?
We have been doing it and we love it.
But do you think that they need it?
I don't think they need it, because the first people, the first message which was made, when these people came into the public, I think the public was not prepared enough to understand what was happening on the other side. As a result, the other side also became very aggressive and defensive. They are not even talking to us nicely and help us to understand. Only after we read and read, we discover that some of these things has to do with the genetic inheritance, and the other has to do with the environment factors. But we will not get one of us understand that. Many of us just came to the conclusion that just a stubbornness and just a practice and just wickedness, which is sometimes, let me say, which is true. But let us also look at the cause of the whole issue. They are not prepared to talk to us, and therefore, many of us on this side are defending the whole issue too much on the expense of the gays themselves. He said,
Linda,
so can I quickly come
you
in
may.
there? Yeah, I want to, again, I'm a very compartmented, I have a very compartmented headspace. I want to receive the welcoming of the church. We also acknowledge as a community that it is a journey that we've been coming with. I could tell you 15 years from now, there was no opportunity to engage with the churches and journeying our sexuality and our spirituality, and that is happening right now. I also acknowledge the need for basic engagement around sexuality and issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression to the general communities in this country so that people can understand how diversified we are, and we are just not one clumped community. I also want to lament that I am a great survivor of counseling because I could never accept. I knew I was different. I was a child that was tomboyish, but I always knew that I was not, being gays or homosexual at that time. We didn't know those words. We only knew tomboy and muffy at that time. And these were words that were derogatory. We were taught that they don't exist. People like that are not normal. And I was a homophobe. But that was internalized homophobia that I personally had because I had internal conflicts about my identity because where I come from, I needed to pursue and advance my Christian life. And when I started finding myself, I had conflicting journeys about spirituality and sexuality because my doctrine does not allow this lifestyle. My mother was very clear about the doctrine of the church also. But it took a long time for us to be where we are as a family. And I should say that that counseling didn't help me and make me straight. And nothing the church can do today would ever make me straight. But I will contribute to the church to be able to advance the discourse of our congregation. And that's the level of investment that I believe is important. I also understand that the church needs to engage us because there's many that feel that there's opportunity to be able to make us straight. For those that feel they're converted, it's theirs. But I sit here at this age of mine where I can tell you there's nothing anybody can do to make me straight. But I also believe there's so much I can do to contribute to the demystification of how people objectify us as LGBTI people. And I think there's a need for us to have a debate, critical engagement, but also respect for each person. Just as Pastor I said, where my rights end, your right starts. Namibians have been saying we are forcing this agenda down on them. No, we are not. Just because there's prominency about the rainbow flag they see all around, and the country is waking up for this transformational discussion, people are now saying we are forcing it down their throats. No. People are claiming that we are forcing down our sexual organs, lifestyles in their lives. No, we're not. They are making our sexual organs the part of their lives. I always ask, if I have to sit here across you, John, and I ask you, have you ever thought and asked yourself why you're straight? Have you ever had a moment like that?
Of course.
You've had that, right? And imagine with me, I've always known I'm straight. From childhood, because that's the doctrine. And then simply in your life, you realize this inner conflict within yourself. Then what do I do as a child like that? Do I blame my parents now? Or do I blame the church that I've been going to? Or do I blame the location I grew up in? You can't. We need to find a middle ground of dialogue. And when it comes to the issue of homosexuality, it always ends up into a debate. I seek audience for dialogue, not for you to prosecute me. Because if I have to dig up on your life and see how you treat your day-to-day life and people around you, I'm sure a lot of red flags will come across. And that's not what we exist for. We are trying to be able to say that the diversification of our sexual orientations is a discussion to have. And the discussion is just amongst homosexuals and heterosexuals. I pity the bisexuals because they will even have a tougher life. And then worst of all, the gender identity aspect of transgender lives are being put out there and then mixed with us homosexuals. And that level of recognition in this country hasn't happened in terms of that we do exist. And I've challenged this country again. Any leader in this country, sitting in parliament, standing there and saying, I recognize the existence of LGBTI people. They don't necessarily need to say, I acknowledge their equal rights, and because obviously you are opening up a Pandora box like this one of this discussion. But there's no one that had the guts except one in 1994 when we had the first brutal and the end of the brutal attack towards us as LGBTI people. After that, we've lived. But nobody had the guts to lead us and say, include us, except one policy framework that advanced this country in 2015, that again had a clear description of inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, and that's the National Human Rights Action Plan that was passed by Parliament. And can you believe it that when report back sessions about updates on progress of implementation happens, your government and public institutions are very clear. We do not know how to service LGBTI people, and also the law makes it illegal, which means there's a conflicting narrative from the leadership in institutions to the person that opens the door for you. And I think that needs to be demystified, because you cannot advance your personal prejudice in a service that you need to deliver nationally.
Linda, I'll cut you there quickly. Pastor, do you agree with Linda when she says that there needs to be a critical engagement and debate between the community and not only the church but various government structures, various national structures, in order to advance the conversation but also to see a way forward? Because it always seems as if that whenever the conversation comes up, there's tension.
You need to understand that the students are our children. We have nowhere to set them, and we have nowhere to escape them. And Linda must just understand that she's not only the one who is bleeding because of the past, all of us, because we are all victims. You must understand that I'm not just a pastor, I am a father. And I expect anything at any time. My own child to come home, or somebody tell me that your child is also homosexual. And that time I became a victim. And not only that, many homosexuals are fathers and mothers. You understand? They have children, and their children are very young. When they grow up, they will be told that your mother and your father is this and that. That child will be a victim too. Linda must understand that life is all about in the relation. I mean, we are in the locked, in the woven, and in the related in one way or another. That's why we are very content, and we know that we can run nowhere, we can hide nowhere. Neither can run anywhere, because we belong here, and we belong here. Let us sit and talk. Unfortunately, let me just be honest with Linda here, because I like to tell people the truth, and the truth will have them. And I will say this in love, because I love people. I love them. I love you guys in the studio. You are my country people. You are my countrymen and women. I have no other country than this country, and I do not want you to escape this country to go to another country because of the problem we have. Let us sit and discuss about it. The problem, however, is this. Gays and lesbians are too educated, and because of that, they are too clever in many things, to not really prepare to say, look, here we are, this is our problem, and we also understand that you parents, you pastors, you politicians, you do not understand us because you have never been where we are. So they were the one who are supposed to be on the position to explain things from not only really the environment, the environmental aspect where they kept us, aspect where they have grown up and what will happen, and also explain to us technical things that related to genetic inheritance. And we want to understand the whole thing in order to help them properly. Now, what I am seeing all the time is condemnation, because they are imposing themselves, seems to me, upon us, and we are rejecting them. We are rejecting them to the point of pain, which is not good. So I do not think this thing that the church is afraid to discuss issues. Maybe preparation is needed, but from both sides. And when we talk, we must also understand that the church has a position. One of the positions of the church is this: you do not when a person comes to your office on a private note, you deal with him privately and you discuss with him and you listen to him. But when somebody is asking the public questions like this, remember, I'm not just answering you. I'm also answering the people in Rundu, in Kaupberg, in the Argona region. Therefore, you must not expect me to just light, because we are not on one by one face-to-face discussion. So, lastly, I must say, yes, she's right, but all of us must go and prepare, because the church will come with their message. They will come with their data and say, here we stand, what can you do with us? And then the church must go and prepare and say, well, what can we do with this situation? Look at the issue of Corona now. The Corona is
all right, Pastor. Pastor, hold that thought.
John, before you come with your next engagement with us, I'm glad to hear the pastor agrees with me that I advance the importance of having a dialogue. And having a dialogue in terms of we presenting what we and who we are to our communities. That's key, because we'll always have to explain ourselves because it's an unknown turf for many people. It's just a spoken turf, but people haven't realized many of us in our realities, and I agree with that. I'm also glad to hear that the pastor is advancing the narrative I just shared to actually say that we are more than the label of just homosexuals and being objectified, because the intersectional relations that I shared, that I'm a woman, I'm somebody's daughter, I'm somebody's aunt, and I'm somebody's mother, grandmother, that initially shows the intersectionalities of our realities. And I think I'm glad that he's advancing it. What I think he didn't get clear from me was the aspect that I say we acknowledge the process and journey that needs to take place with the church. We also acknowledge the church's position for over 30 years in this country when it comes to that issue. We acknowledge the need for national debate and conversation, but we do not acknowledge the condemnation that comes from these institutions, because we cannot affirm their positions, because the doctrine that we know is the doctrine that he's advancing. You are my child, come, I will pray for you. And I think that is very clear for us to be able to advance and have a clear understanding, because we are not seeking any additional attention. It is just unfortunate that it is the topic of debate, and that fortunate because people have never seen this come out to a point that a document needs to go to Parliament. It's historic for Namibians. It's historic for me, whether it is a positive debate or a negative debate. It shows that we have a government that is willing to go to an uncomfortable place and allow Namibians to decide, and allow Namibians to debate, but not allow other Namibians to make our lives miserable like we are now in the streets of Karutura and wherever we find ourselves, being labeled that we are flaunting and forcing people to look at us and understand us. I don't need anybody to look at me when I walk past the street or when I'm sitting in a restaurant. You're not forced to do that. We are also not forcing the church to accept us. We are asking the church to realize its mandate and its foundation. And that's where we come from. And I think for us, and I'll say it again, as a lesbian woman, there's no special rights I'm asking for. There's no special, my rights can no be different from yours across. But of course, the status of inequalities can advance the need of why I, as a woman, need to be amplified for affirmative and non-discrimination.
Do you ever think that with or without the necessary engagements and deliberations, that there will be a symbiosis of some sort between the community you're representing and institutions such as the church and any other state or national institutions?
Yes. And
with or without deliberations?
Deliberations is the key to transforming anything. There's no way, as Africans, where did our history come from? Around the fire, where strategies were made, where discipline was advanced. So dialogue is a foundation of where we come from as Africans. And the dialogue will continue around those fires that we are having, because it's important for us to understand that you cannot legislate without having voices in it, without reflective engagement. So in no way can anything change if there is no dialogue. And that dialogue is key. And I keep asking that we shift away from a debate in a sense of a dialogue where you are able to sit across me and make your point in a debate form, but also respectfully. But right now, there's no one that has had a decent conversation with me as a lesbian woman. To just ask, so why are you like that? Don't you think you need a man in your life? God created, that's the words, God created a beautiful woman. Yes, God created a beautiful woman. I still remain that beautiful woman.
Pastor, do you think that, I mean, everything in life evolves. We are educated every day. Our cars evolve, our phones evolve, everything evolves. Do you think that the church's position on homosexuality will ever evolve or change?
Listen to Titus chapter. I didn't just read one of the passage here. And in the church refused to listen to the gays and lesbians, it's simply because they have failed to understand what the Bible teaches. Titus chapter 2 verse 11 says, "For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, to all men." It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passion, and to live self-control, upright, and godly lives in the present age, while we are waiting for the blessed hope, reading downward. In other words, we do not just the church doesn't just have the problem of homosexuals alone. Think of mental issues in our country. We have people who come from wherever, whether we come from the north to the south, or they come from Europe to Africa, or they come from the Great Lakes, the Bantu people, the Bantu people down to the south and find the Sami people around and push them around. I'm just referring to this, the issue of coming from somewhere and pushing people and then change the whole land, and because you have the false paper called ownership, and then you feel you are different. And I'm saying that it's confronted also by those people who have big land on the expense of majority who doesn't have land in this country. We are also confronted by the issue of divorcee in this country, the issue of murder and raping. We are not just confronted by the issue of homosexuals. However, when I am there, I must state clearly, categorically clear that the church has to be prepared to meet with them, and they must prepare to meet with the church. They must prepare to talk to the church and explain to the church, because the church is the only one thing to offer is counseling. And the biblical counseling in the light of proper understanding will amend everything. The reason why we have so many pastors who are just judging and rejecting and sometimes going into the stage where they will get angry and frustrated by their own sexual is simply because the issue is not yet clear. This is what I said in the beginning, and I will repeat it again. So the church needs to listen to the issue of this. The church must also listen clearly to the issue of land. Not only the issue of this, land. When people said we have no land, and now we are told no.
Okay, Pastor, we're just quickly pressed for time, hey? There's an issue I do want to raise with you. Historically and now, we have seen a trend all over the world where there are certain men of the cloth that do engage in same-sex relationships. I mean, some churches have also adopted the idea of allowing same-sex couples to be married in their churches. But let's focus specifically on men of the cloth engaging in same-sex relationships. How does the church deal with that issue?
I'm not here interested in breaking the law in order to make the law. I'm here talking about negotiation at the end of the issue from the practical viewpoint. The reason why I love medical doctors is because they don't try to treat symptoms. They are looking for the cause. Some of the hospitals that people just refer, they have not solved the problem. This is why the problem is still coming up and again. They thought by just accepting the homosexual, the problem will not be over. The problem is not over. You need to find out the cause, and you must make a medical doctor trying to find the cause. You go to the medical doctor and you tell them, I'm sweating, When I slept the whole night, my ethic, there's nothing interested in your ethic or in your sweating. You want to find the cause. And when you find the cause, that is what he killed. So in this case, we do want to understand properly what is homosexual. What does it involve? Is this thing just a behavior that somebody has learned? Or is this a behavior maybe somebody was born with? If it is a behavior that somebody was born with, how can we accept or handle? And as I said in the beginning, the issue of colonized talk as a great lesson. When you colonize, what did we do? We didn't run away. We tried to use means, including the pastors, the washing of hands, the them. What are we doing?
We seem to have lost the pastor there.
John, I just want to take up that question of yours. It's important to understand that we welcome the church to have that dialogue for us to unpack the discussion about nurture and nature, whether we're born like this or whether it's something that I learned from a friend, or whether it is contagious if you associate yourself with queer people. So it's a warm welcoming, because I can actually manifest as a speaker who in 2018 went to the Catholic Church conference at Deerbrow, and there was over 150 deacons and fathers in that space. The bishop himself was there, and I sat right next to the bishop. And at that moment, our presentation was supposed, because they also asked the same question about what is the cost. We want to understand. It was amazing that our schedule was set for 1 hour, but it went up to 2 hours, because there were pastors or deacons that got up and said, I come from a very remote space. This is not a discussion that we are having. Okay, and it's the first time meeting a gay person saying it out of themselves. So the other denominations, there's a need for us to have that open dialogue. And that space that we were given was not for them to say they are approving us. It was just the same question that the pastor is asking. What was the cause around it? And I want to, at the end, also answer that question of yours. Being homosexual is indivisible. You can't see it. It's like being straight. It's indivisible. So it's the same thing that, yes, you will find homosexual people in the attire of the church, in the cloth. You'll find them in banks. You'll find them on the street. You'll find them in churches. You'll find them in parliament. You'll find them anywhere and everywhere. Because we are human beings and we are diverse and different in our own unique ways. So even if we want to manifest or not agree that it exists within the fraternity of the religious spaces, well, we had to hide it for years. And if a system doesn't allow you to be, then surely you will never be who you are. I recently spoke to a 53-year-old trans person that came out and said, I'm done being in the closet. 53 years. How do I live my life? But I also sit very far where I've worked very hard in my life. I've got children. How do you deal with a situation like that? All you can do is journey through the reality that that person has gone through to be able to understand how they can re-piece their lives that they have been hiding all their lives. And I think it's the hope created by after 30 years, because we must understand the debate right now and the debate the times of our years in the 90s and in the 80s is not the same as it is today. Technology has taken over, so it will flaunt any page and any system you find. And that is why people will definitely feel that we're trying to shove it down their throats, but no, we're not. All we are saying is, Namibia, the time has come for us to talk about the diversity of our communities.
Pastor, we seem to have lost you there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, clear.
Did you hear what Linda just said now?
I understand, Linda. That's why I said, however, when we meet, we must prepare to adjust to each other, because the church's responsibility and the mandate to preach the word and mix and with love. The love that the Bible teaches is beyond explanation. So Linda and her colleague can be condemned in that love of God. You understand? Because God loves them and God cares for them. This is why they are still breathing. Okay? Having said that, but that doesn't mean that the church must no longer present the mandate of preaching and teaching and rebuking and correcting in love, because what we want.
Okay, thank you for that, Pastor. We seem to be running out of time, but Linda, I just wanted to ask you one more question. You're right, we did open Pandora's box. I'm closing it now. We seem to have drifted away from the issue of sodomy, and I just want to do it a bit of service, but also just shy away from it a bit as well. Except for the sodomy law, right, which is, in your words, discriminatory towards the LGBTQI community.
Gay men.
Towards gay men.
Yes, because it doesn't affect me as a lesbian woman directly.
Thank you for that.
In terms of the way that it is put out for us in this country.
Are there any other laws in this country that discriminate against members of the LGBTQI community?
It's important for me to first take
very briefly, please.
Yes, it's important for me to first take a step back to looking at general human rights equality in this country for LGBTI people. Then we can talk about legislative realities, because the constitutional provision and the legal framework at times in terms of the service delivery also differentiates. Because that's why I made the example about the Marital Act. So I can't sit here and tell you that there is a specific legislation that discriminates around LGBTI issues or issues of sexual orientation. But I can attest and speak with confidence that there are great loopholes in our legal framework that does disservice to us as a community. And I'll make it a very practical example in terms of, I'll make it a practical example in terms of going to service at healthcare. If I'm there, I need to be able to justify the type of service I need, or otherwise I get a general service. I need to be able to make sure that the service delivery is gender affirming and gender recognizing the diversity of people that are coming in. The pastor just said, the church is a clinic. You come in with your diagnosis and we're able to see how we're able to help you. Now, even already at that level, when I go for a service of such, the person that is giving me the psychosocial support services ends up carrying forth their prejudice because of a doctrine that is forth. And then I'll take you another step ahead. Namibia has an enabling legislation, for instance, like the Birth, Death and Immigration Act that allows transgender persons to be able to change their gender markers. The law and the act allows that. But the country is not giving services to ensure that the inaction of that legal framework is advanced. And when Namibians go out of the country to go through their whole transitioning process, they're not able to come back and change their gender markers. Then the 25,000 documents are now simply required while you follow the steps as outlined in the Act. So it's important for us to understand, extended to that, also the basic human rights, accessing the justice service. And I'll start from a police station. If I have to go in there, and I've taken so many human rights violation cases in where you can see queer people have been violated, but then the person behind the counter is very clear about their prejudice. And I don't want to say it is the institution itself. That this service comes from the person delivering the service. That is why I'm able to sit here today and say that I need to thoroughly study very distinct legislation to be able to outline. But that is why we need right now a non-discrimination law that looks at all forms of equality in this country, from a hate speech to harassment, because those are the first steps of harassments and uncomfortability that our lives are. Then when you come to an institution of service, that's a complete level of violation that we're experiencing. So I can clearly say the Namibian legal framework carries high level of discrimination and preference for heterosexual people. And the inclusion, I can't even put, many of us lose our relationships after so many years. But you have invested 15 years of a relationship, you have worked so hard, and when you part, there is no inclination of benefit from what you have, because the system doesn't allow you. If we don't make our own contracts of agreement through the legal system, we are not able to benefit. Many of us also lose being in relationships for 15 years. Then you, as a heterosexual family member, come over when I'm dead and say, this is Linda's stuff, we want everything. But I was not good enough for you when I was alive, but my inheritance is of great need. And also many of us as gay people, take care of our families. From the age of 17, I had to be head of house, in my family, and I'm still the head of house as the baby in the family in terms of being able to make sure everything is in place. But my mother remains the key matriarch of the family. But that has evidently proven that I've realized before I came out, and after I came out, there was a complete transitioning, because your money is good as a gay person, but your identity and lifestyle is not good. And I think those are the legal frameworks that are saying that are playing a critical role on our day-to-day lives, but also it plays out on how the system has advanced the doctrine for our families and the country to exclude us in spaces.
All right.
But the last thing I want to say to you, there's a need to segregate these things. Homosexuality is not illegal. The discussion with the church we need to take, the discussion with the church is about who we are as homosexuals. The discussion around same-sex marriage with the church in the country is a complete different discussion. And I'm hoping that we can come back here and have a frank conversation on what the LRDC report means and what it means for the country in the future, and for us to be able to understand what sodomy is. And I'm calling upon the country to be respectful to us as citizens, because we don't disrespect anybody and their lifestyles that they're living.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. We could talk for ages about this. I want to thank Linda Baumann and Pastor Laban Muashekele for joining me. Until next time, goodbye.